everyone. And then we're also going to lengthen the backing because sometimes, for whatever reason, either you've mismeasured or you've put your backing on one way and accidentally turned your quilt top the other way, and you get down and you realize that your backing isn't longer. Instead of taking it off the frame and putting it back on and setting up the pantograph again and doing all that kind of stuff, you can actually piece the backing right on the frame. And it really is a lot easier than some of you would think. It's easier and faster, actually, than taking it off the frame and attaching it with your domestic sewing machine. Let's get started, okay? So I have a faux quilt going on here. Nothing's quilted at all. It's just solid fabric. I did baste down the sides just to give us a little realism there. All right, so I've come to the end. I fixed my batting, and I'm really excited because now I have my batting. And then I advance it up, and now my backing's too short. I should ask for a measuring tape for Christmas. Maybe. Okay, so in this scenario, this is the way I do it. Obviously, we can't quilt to the bottom, and we've got too much here. There's no way we can make this happen, okay? We've got about 6 inches, maybe 7 inches more quilt than we have backing, so we have to fix it. I'm going to roll my very long batting now that I've added to it. And I'm going to roll it and the quilt top up and get it out of my way. Now, this is a personal thing for me. If you get to the bottom, generally you're not miles out. So if we seam this, it's not like the seam's going to be a third of the way into the quilt or a half of the way into the quilt and make sense. It's going to be right at the very bottom, right? So instead of attaching it to the very bottom here and having that seam this far from the bottom edge, and then you end up with like a lumpy bottom right near where your binding is, I figure I'm already short. So I may as well make it a little bit shorter and get this seam further up into the backing than right down at the bottom, okay? So I've moved this out of the way, and like I said, especially if you're only an inch or so short and you have to add some, rather than adding that seam right at the very bottom, so it's only this far or this far or this far away from the bottom of your quilt, I'm going to attach it a little bit higher up. I'll use a larger piece of batting, but I'll add it back a little bit so it's not sitting right at the bottom. So my first thing to do is I'm going to use my channel lock. Now on this Millie, I have electronic channel locks. If you don't have electronic channel locks, you probably have a manual channel lock. With the APQS machines, there's a horizontal channel lock on the back of the machines. With Millie, she's got electronic ones, okay? So I'm going to put my machine back in this space somewhere because that's going to actually put this seam about this far from the bottom of my quilt. And then that way it's not going to look like I had to add backing to the bottom of my quilt. You know what I mean? It might hopefully look like it was part of the design process. So I'm going to stitch a line all the way across. I'll put my channel lock on. I'll come a little forward just a little bit. Needle down, needle up. Now I'm using bright yellow thread because I want you to be able to see it. And I'm just going to stitch a line all the way across. So now I have a nice even horizontal line to attach to line my fresh piece up too. Okay, move that out of the way. I'm going to attach a chunk of red so that it's easier to see. So I've got this big piece of red. I've already cut it so that it's the same width. And I'm going to bring this forward a little bit so it's easier to reach. So I'll bring this forward. It was funny, I had a customer in here the other day, and she was quilting, and this happened to her. So we had a bit of a giggle, and I had her come back the next day and with more backing, and we did this method. So I said to her she didn't need to watch the live tonight because she already got the lesson yesterday. It happens. It happens to everybody, and it's just fine, you know. It's not fun, but it's fine. All right, so I have some pearl head pins, and I've got my backing. So my backing's the same width as this, and then I've got a nice length. Don't be stingy. It was already short. We don't want to just make it to the bottom. Just give yourself some room to breathe, okay? Anytime you're doing something like this and you've got pins anywhere close, make sure that stuff is away, and make sure you are in your head counting how many pins you've taken out. You don't want to leave a pin in the quilt, okay? Better yet, have somewhere close by that you can put the pins so you're not mucking with the pins on the quilt top, okay? All right, so I'm going to take the one edge, right sides together. So we've got the right side under here, so we're going to take the right side of our backing, and I'm going to bring a pin, and I'm going to line up, and I can feel it with my finger. I'm going to line up the edge of that extra backing with that line of stitching. I can actually feel with my finger that they're touching, okay? I'm then going to take another pin just to hold the weight. I'm going to take another pin and stick a pin up here. You can use your side clamps if you want as well. I've already got pins right here, so I've stuck a pin up here, and that's holding the weight of it for me at the moment, okay? Now I can put my clamp on, because that's actually going to help hold the weight as we move it along, okay? I'm holding this side, and I'm going to bring this to another point, not too far away, and I can feel the stitching with my finger, so I know that the edge of my fabric, keep them in a bowl so you know where they are. They're a wonderful tool, but they're dangerous if they're inside a quilt. I lost my edge. There we go. So again, I just sort of, I can feel it, that it's touching that stitching. I'll do a couple across. I'm leaving a pretty big space because I just want to get them on there, and then I'll go back in a minute and we'll put a few more on. Is this making sense so far? Can everybody see okay? I know I'm missing a camera. That camera angle was perfect. I worked really hard on getting that second camera angle just right. But the powers that be only want us to use one at a time today, and I don't know why. Okay. And then one on this side here. Okay. Again, I'm going to slide my fingers up there, and we're going to put a pin back here. That's going to help hold the weight for a minute, and then I'll use my clamp, and that will actually hang onto it for me pretty good. Okay. Now I'm going to stick a few more pins in because I want to make sure that I have a nice solid join there. I don't want it floppy, okay? And it's okay if this takes 15 minutes. Don't rush it. Just take your time. And I'm putting the pins close to the edge. So they're not going to do you any good up here, way back here, because as we come across with the machine, the backing on the bottom still is able to move. So you want to make sure that you're putting your pins right so that they're in the very edge of that backing fabric that's underneath. A few more. So how many of you out there have had to do this before? Have you ever tried it? Or have you taken your quilts off the frame and patched your backing and then put it back on the frame? What do you say? Here we go. So that's enough. That's lots. That's probably too much, but that's fine. Better too many than not enough. And then the only other thing I do, especially depending on how big this back piece is, I'm just going to kind of run my hands up underneath here, and I'm going to stick some pins through the top here. And again, keep count of how many you have, because we don't want the backing puddling on the frame and getting caught up in the carriage, right? So you want to make sure you've got a hold of that. If it was really long, I would actually pull it to the back. Pull it back there and go to the back and stick some pins in the back. But normally we're not using a piece of fabric that big when we're doing this, because we don't get it that short. Just keep an eye on where you're putting your pins, okay? There we go. All right. That's good. So my backing is flat underneath there. I've got it tacked up there so it's not hanging and going to get caught anywhere. And now we're going to use the machine, and we're just going to stitch our seam allowance. I'm going to go about 3/4 of an inch. You don't need a whole inch, maybe 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch from this line. From this stitch line is where I'm going to stitch the next one, and I'm going to use my channel lock for that, okay? So I'm going to start here. And we are going to take our pins out before we get to them, all right? Channel lock on. I like to do a little back stitch here just to secure the seam while we're working. And then just as I get to it, I'm going to pull my needle or my pin out. Normally, to be honest, I drop them on the table. So that's what I'm going to do, because that's what I'd do if I was here by myself. So as I pull them out, I just drop them back on the back of my table. I've got my hand is sort of following. That helps everything feed together nicely. Don't take the chance and try to stitch over these pins, okay? Stop when you get there. It's worth the extra second. And then when you start to get to the middle, you don't even have to stop. You can just keep going. Little back stitch right there just to make sure it doesn't come apart. You should have scissors. I just rip it or pull it, tear it. And then I'm going to take all of these pins out, making sure we get them all out. I'm going to cut along that stitching line, the original stitching line. I'm going to cut right on that thread. It's going to give me about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. There we go. Then we're going to take these clamps off. I'm going to send this back, and I'm going to let it wind back just until I can see the bottom. Now look at all that beautiful backing fabric and all that room we have. And my seam is way back here. It's not right here, right? We didn't just sort of put a patch in it. It actually looks like maybe that was supposed to be there, especially if you don't have matching fabric. If you don't have any of your original backing fabric left. So I'm going to do that. Actually, I'm just going to cut my batting off because now it's 1,000 miles too long. So I'm going to get rid of that. Here we go. And then I'll get my leaders positioned again. And then we'll attach this. Now, as I attach it, I'm watching how it's draping because you want to make sure that you're putting it back on so that your backing is still going to sit nice and flat, right? So you want to watch that you don't have it tweaked. Hopefully you can see that. And you don't want it sort of higher on one side and all dippy on the other. So you want to watch it so that it looks nice and even for you. Bring that one up a little bit more. There we go. And I'm not worried about this rough edge down here because it won't matter. Put those back on. And then we're going to wind it back because we need to press it. You don't want to leave a big lumpy seam in there. Now I have a bit of a trick. It's a hack trick. I use a chunk of roll from a batting roll. I thought there was. It's okay. I thought there was something crawling on it. It's not. It was just a little piece of fluff. This is just off a batting roll. I just cut a chunk of this off there, so it's easy to handle. And I'm going to use that on the bottom. I'm going to put it under here. And as I go across to press, I'm just going to rest my iron on that. And then I can push, because I'm pushing against the cardboard, but I'm not going to burn my hands. The steam's not, no heat's going to come near my hands. But it gives a nice hard surface to press this down, and you'll get a really nice crisp open seam. So I start at one end, open my seam, and I just walk along using the batting roll as my press thing. Nice, hey? Look how nice and flat that is. And I couldn't feel any of the heat, so I didn't burn anything. My hand I'm talking about. And there we go. We can now put this all back on here, tuck it back under, smooth it all out, baste it, and carry on. There. And that's it. That's all there is to it. It's super easy. Super easy. Ta-da!